What's up, man?
What's going on?
I'm in Minnesota.
Yeah, I can feel the cold.
Can you? I don't know if you can feel anything at -3 degrees with a low of -10. Dude, there's a blizzard coming in today. It's supposed to be pretty bad.
Into where you are.
Yeah, and then it's going to like Michigan and stuff. I don't even know if my brother and folks are going to even make it to Christmas because it's like
Whoa.
It's starting to snow right now, but I think it's going to be like a big one.
Whoa. What
Yeah.
is your brother doing? Is he like canceled or is he just hanging out at the airport or?
Him and my parents are supposed to come in on Friday. It's now
okay.
Wednesday, so we'll just have to see how it goes. But
Oh man.
yeah, here for Christmas, man. Hang out with my sister and nieces and nephews. So figure we would just record a quick podcast now and get the last one in. Maybe not the last one, but one here before Christmas towards the end of the year.
Dude, it's December 21st. We've done like 4 of these this year. There's no way we're doing any more. This is the last one.
Yeah, this is probably the last one. We've done more than 4, but yeah. So we had some things we wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple of things. What was the one that we thought was going to be a good one for this episode?
Dude, it's a SSR initial render, second render.
All right, so we do have a few things to talk about. We wanted to bring up some tweets just to kind of shoot the breeze a bit about what's going on Twitter, and then we were going to talk about a question that came up actually in Build UI's Discord. That's what it was. So cool. Let's talk about. There were some tweets going back and forth with Ryan Florence, Michael Jackson, and Dan Abramov that I thought were kind of interesting. And both Michael and Ryan, authors of Remix, we're talking about kind of the early days of React and lamenting hooks and kind of pining for the days where, we just had class components. So let's actually read these threads because I think you haven't quite read them yet.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan says, React 18 calling useEffect use memo twice on mount and dev to make components concurrent mode safe is ironically making people do exactly what they don't want people to do, assign stuff to refs during render.
Hey, it's me. I'm in this tweet.
I was going to say, do you agree with that, first of all?
Yeah, well, so yes, you do see people say, oh, you only want this thing to run once. It's running twice in strict mode. Just use a ref to mark if you've run it before. And yeah, so now you're using like instance state to track it. Mm-hmm. I will say when I hit this, every time I hit this sort of thing, I realize like, oh, I wasn't really thinking about my cleanup function correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And strict, I think we've talked about this before, but strict mode ends up making my code better. But dude, absolutely. Like I'm in a big code base and I have a million tasks to do and I'm just trying to get things done. And oftentimes I'm thinking in terms of life cycle and I just want to mark like, yeah, I did the work, throw it in a ref and just track it there. So, yeah, I don't.
If refs are generally thought of as like almost like an escape hatch, like they should be your tool of last resort. And if the twice on mount thing is happening and people are starting to reach for them on a regular basis, it feels like maybe an issue.
I think in like, I kind of like land on both sides of this. So in the simple case, when I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to understand stuff, like, yeah, strict mode firing things twice definitely pushes my code to a better spot. And I like that. Like, I feel like I walk away learning something. There's other times when I'm in like a really, really complicated component that tons of people have worked on, lots of effects, lots of stuff that I just can't keep track of in my head. And during those times, I think the like safest thing for me to do is reach for a ref because I don't have the, 2 or 3 days it would take to unwind that component. Right. Also, too, it's like not really the task. It's like a big refactoring task. So sometimes the ref is the easiest tool to reach for there.
Right. No, I like that. Good answer. So he says it's making people assign stuff to rest during render. He says originally the concepts to use React were simpler. The hard one was this. Then hooks traded this for object identity, item potency, and lexical scope, but it was still generally forgiving. strict mode is completely unforgiving. We traded forgiveness for concurrent rendering. Is concurrent rendering worth it? I love the idea of an input that filters a complex list and have the UI respond immediately always instead of the main thread being blocked, sometimes the UI not immediately showing the character. I don't know if all this is worth it. Or a big calendar UI and you want to click next month button quickly and not have the thread blocked and see the active state of the button persist for 300 milliseconds after mouse up as the thread is blocked because you interrupted a render. If I had any feedback for the React team, it would be to show the value here. Your people are struggling. Before, we'd optimize a component here and there with memo and should component update. Now it's like we have to optimize our entire app so that a few cases are automatically optimized. I thought that was pretty interesting because that is the pessimistic take on kind of the approach that they decided. And like the optimistic or more like not charitable but supportive positive take is we're helping you find bugs earlier, right? And whereas this take is it's the same thing. It's like you're forcing me to find bugs that are edge cases, and it's kind of like, using like Elm or something. The first time you use, move from JavaScript to TypeScript. It's like you had a bug in that function the whole time, and types are actually helping you find that earlier, but sometimes it feels like it's not worth the trade-off or the cost is too much and you're nitpicking me too much and just let me write my buggy code because I'll get my the main thing done faster.
Yeah. Also too, like these bugs are interesting because they're bugs, but they might never happen in production. Just based on how your users use your app and flow through your application, they might never happen. So I can see that being annoying, that you're being told you have these, whether it's TypeScript, you have these type errors, or whether it's your effect double firing. Yeah, that's all.
So that's kind of the other thing though, is like, are these, Ryan's angle was that it's about concurrence mode, and that's kind of like they're setting the stage for that. But like we don't use concurrent mode, and if we don't, then this is not worth it. But then eventually Dan gets in there and says, actually, these are bugs that could happen outside of concurrent mode. All of them are. Mm-hmm. And every time he's run into an issue, like in pairing with someone at work, he has fixed a bug that would have happened outside of concurrent mode. I was a little confused by this because I thought when we started talking about this stuff that it was about making a component safe for something like off screen, which is a potential concurrent feature.
Yes,
so
but
is there an overlap, or is it disjoint sets with issues that can happen in concurrent mode and issues that can happen outside of concurrent mode?
They're both disjoint sets, I think is the one I want.
Okay.
Not sure I'm fully understanding you, but yeah.
That's set theory.
The double effect firing can happen in two cases. So let's talk about the non-concurrent mode one. You navigate to a screen, you quickly hit the back button, you quickly hit the forward button. Like in that case, like the component is gonna mount, unmount, mount, right? Because you go there, back, forward. So you have to think about, you just have to think about that.
So what's an example? The double mount though, is it, so in that case, is it that, because the double mount is saying, I just created a new connection to my chat room and I did it twice. Well, they do run unmount effects, don't they?
Yeah. No, some.
So it really is just a page that you render and then render again sometime later.
Right. So this is like the non-concurrent mode version. Just think of go to a page, click back, go forward really quickly. And that does happen in real apps. Right. And if you don't have a cleanup function, or you only think the person just starts on page A and they end up on page B and that's it, then you actually didn't think about that they can go A, B, A, B. And that introduces bugs. Like if you're logging to an analytics service, or you're doing some sort of mutation that you only expect to happen once, there's bugs there. The other side, the off-screen thing, is how I always kind of interpreted why the strict mode stuff exists. It's going to help us for this future off screen. So that is, you render a component and then that component goes off screen, but all of its state is saved. But when it goes into that off screen phase of its
You unmount effects.
life cycle. Exactly. You clean up the
Right.
effects, and then when it
Right.
comes back on screen, all its state is still the same, but it remounts, it reruns the effects. So
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I found some Dan getting in here and saying, I need to know more about case. You mean things that break with double rendering would break if your parent component adds an extra set state. Things that break with double effect would break if you navigate back and forth. So it all seems like real issues to me. Exactly what you said there. So that's interesting. Anyways, I thought that was just like an interesting little conversation, that they were talking about. It's a different approach. It is like a typed language and saying we want to upfront cost the cost of avoiding these kinds of bugs creeping into our software, and we want to do it over the whole course of the development process instead of maybe moving faster up front and then waiting for the issues to come up and then fixing those issues within single components. Now, from the performance side, I do like the idea of like should component update is just like I'm dropping this D3 chart in your app and I need it. It's not going to be a bread and butter React component that just re-renders over and over again. It's I'm going to make sure I use should component update or whatever. I never really wrote React when that was around and did that. And I haven't worked on a project. I guess we have had some projects where we had to be mindful. There's been too many re-renders. You have to think about it a little bit harder. But something about it for me from the performance perspective I like, but from the mental model and the effects. The performance perspective I like in general the approach of wait until it's a problem.
Yes.
But from bugs and effects and things like that, I actually like upfront. I like the approach of like a typed language. You know what I'm saying?
Interesting.
So
yeah,
it is interesting because it's kind of like when I think about performance, I'm like Yagni. But when I think about bugs, I think I've come around to like more and more with things like TypeScript that the correctness of the program, if you can amortize that cost of being correct starting from the beginning, there's something nice about that,
I think
it gets hard. It's because the cost curve goes really high once you have a full app, and then you start adding these things, and you've introduced, it's the permutations, right?
I think that as long as a bug that you're telling people about, you can give them a clear path to fixing, it's fine.
Right.
I think the confusion or the complaints are you're double firing my effect. It's super confusing, and I don't know how to fix it. And I think that's a problem.
Right.
And
right.
just like not even outside of like the double firing thing, just like the React effect dependencies. useEffect takes dependencies. Linter gets mad at you when you don't pass them all in. I've seen apps where people want to ignore dependencies. Like they just want to say, only when this one thing changes do I want this effect to fire, even though the effect is going to close over all the other state.
Right.
And so they just only put that one thing in there, get a linter error, and just ignore it. And it would be they don't have the mental model of how to like
guard against
how to guard against all the things changing that they're not interested in. And you know what my answer is always, well, use a ref to track. Just kind of bring us back to the beginning. But there are cases.
By the way, using a ref to track that kind of thing in effect is fine. People get in trouble when they start reading it during render because they're setting things. Is that kind of like the path to a problem?
No, these are both these things started off with setting refs and effects to track if work has been done. Mm-hmm. That was how this thread originally kicked off. So, if you have a clear path to fixing the bug that strict mode is telling you about, then I think this stuff is great. It's when you don't have a clear path, and you see this in other stuff, like my example with effect dependencies. If you only care about one dependency, even though I can point at your program, I can say, hey, you have a bug because like you're closing over this variable, and when that variable changes, you're not rerunning the effect.
So it's getting.
But the person might say like that literally can't create a bug in my system. That's like that's the correct behavior. So I think there's like this balance of like you have a correct reactive React program on one side, and the other side of like no, that's like impossible state, impossible bug in my production app. And obviously and I, being teachers and having this podcast, we're going to lean more towards the, like, you should write a correct React program. You should write a correct TypeScript program. But yeah, I can like empathize with the, like, I don't
definitely
care.
Empathize.
I just want to get it done.
Especially if you're in like a certain situation. We're also pragmatic though when it comes to the work we do and how we teach people to do it. So it's not a black and white thing. It's a spectrum for sure.
Yep.
But it's an interesting way to frame it. What was I gonna say? I think when you talk about the path to fixing it, Dan's been tweeting a lot about the docs. So I'm looking forward to giving them a new read, the beta docs. We'll link to them because I think there's a lot of good information in there. But I also know they were talking about like the useEffect RFC, which I don't think hasn't gotten any movement. No, but that's a sort of thing.
It got axed.
It got axed, yeah. But I think something like that.
Yes.
I think there is, useRef feels very low level in React. Even kind of like the main hooks. I guess useState is pretty easy, but useRef and useEffect feel low level. My most success, I think people's most success is when libraries use those. Those are building blocks. And so, I think that's another way to think about all this stuff is like, I don't really think about that if I'm using a nice hook from a library. If I'm installing React useMeasure and I need to measure the width of an element, it's like, I don't think I could think of a better API than React with hooks with that. I mean, it's like, it's just perfect for me and for what I need. And I don't think about it. So there's a lot of complexity hidden in the hooks there with useEffect, with, maybe it uses layout effect, maybe it uses effect, the double firing, the cleanup of the reset, whatever. But that's kind of when I see these threads, like I actually really like using hooks, and I try, even though I've done a lot of library code and open source, we've done the low level stuff and we love nerding out about it and finding out about it, pushing it. My mental model, I like to keep myself as the mind of an app developer and being productive, building applications, reusable UI components, things like that. And for me, it's like hooks is the best API for that stuff that I've seen. So I'm a huge fan. And I know Ryan is a huge fan of hooks as well. But I get what he's saying. He sees a lot of people struggle with it. Sometimes I think people are struggling with it because they're like going too low level, maybe too soon, and they don't need to be,
Totally. I think you're like this, but anytime I write useEffect, it's kind of like alarm bells go off in my head. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay.
And we tell that to people we pair with too.
I need to go find the NPM, the library that's trying to do what I'm trying to do. And if I'm trying to do too much, there's usually two ways I can take two different hooks and like compose their values. But I will say, just as like a counter to that, like if you're working on a React app, you're eventually going to have to write your own useEffect. You can't escape it forever. So,
right.
Right.
Cool. All right, let's move on here. I've got we had a good question coming up in Discord. Our build UI. So we've got several dozen members in there now. It's pretty cool. People talking about the videos and talking about questions at work. We're also going to be making some new videos here real soon. I think this question is actually going to be become a video on build UI. And we also want to start a new series. Since we finished our Framer Motion series, there's 8 videos up on Framer Motion. It's about 3 hours of content. Cover a lot of my favorite, the best APIs, a lot of the best APIs in Framer Motion. Build a lot of cool demos. So I'm going to be putting out a YouTube video kind of summarizing that. So that'll be fun. But if you're interested, definitely check out buildui.com. But part of becoming a pro member and subscribing, you get to join the Discord. That's where my buddy Brian was hanging out and asked this question. So let's talk about this question. So he is building his app, Campfire, I believe it's called. And it has like a dashboard homepage. And there's a sidebar. And the sidebar can kind of come in and out like you would see in a lot of user interfaces. And on desktop, he wants the sidebar to be open. And on mobile, he wants it to be closed by default. But you can use the hamburger to toggle it on both desktop and mobile. So he has it animated using Framer Motion because he was going through the course and using some of the techniques there. And he was like, basically his question was like, how can I animate this and invert the animated values, right? I'm going from like width 0 to width like 300 pixels or something. And I kind of want initial to be 300 on desktop and 0 on mobile, 300 on desktop, and then animate to 0. And then on mobile, the opposite. So I kind of want to have two different versions based on the media width. So this is really interesting question. And he was having a hard time knowing how I do that on initial render so that the initial render doesn't flicker, because that's what was happening for him. It's a really interesting question because it's like a very high level what you ran into as a programmer building a feature, but there's actually two questions. There's two different questions here. And it actually took some time realizing that, you know? So there's a lot of good lessons in kind of the answer to this.
Well, I think can I answer that first layer, and then you can just throw a wrench and tell me why my answer is wrong.
Definitely.
So
definitely.
I think I need to measure the screen before I render. So that tells me use layout effect. I should use layout effect, and if it's mobile, I set some state to make it closed, and if it's desktop, I set some state to make it open, and then use layout effect is going to run before any pixels get drawn. So after that code runs, my pixels get drawn. Job done. I can go home.
Yeah. So that's great answer. If you're writing just an SPA that only ever rendered on the client, that's a perfect answer. That's exactly what use layout effect is for. So something like Figma, right? Maybe something like Figma. It's going to load in your browser on the client. He's using Next, which does server-side rendering. And so that's where all the problems basically come in. So when me and you were talking about this, we ended up talking, kind of writing this really cool diagram just to help us think about this. But when you server render something, you have initial render from the server. It's coming over as static HTML over the wire. And so it's static HTML, right? It has access to certain features. Like you can do certain things with static HTML that's being sent from a server, and you can do different things with HTML and JavaScript in a user's browser, and some of those overlap and some of them don't. Mm-hmm. So for example, a server can send up CSS with a media query, and a client can do that too. But the client can't. The client knows if the browser is 375 pixels or not, but the server doesn't. So basically, if we kind of untangle this, the problem with your approach of use layout effect is when you initially render the component, I guess basically if you were doing that, you would have a spinner or a blank screen. And he was saying that, and he was like, I kind of want to avoid that, right? Because then you just lose all the benefits. Like nothing meaningful comes from a server, which is what you want. You want to do that. So this is kind of the way we were talking about this. First of all, let's simplify. Let's remove the animation. It's not about animation, right? Let's actually remove the ability to toggle the sidebar. So if it was just show the sidebar on desktop and not on mobile, Tailwind CSS media query, no question, right? You're not even thinking about it. So you put in, hidden and then medium : block, and then that's it. It's done. And that is robust to server-side rendering, and it's going to work in React once your client is hydrated as well. Okay, now you do toggling. So this is just kind of interesting. You do toggling. You want to do toggling with React, like just vanilla, a good approach. So you need open state, and you need set is open as React state. So now the question becomes, okay, what's the default value? Well, let's say it was just true, and so it shows everywhere it toggles false. So now how do we reconcile that with the initial render? And the reality is that ideally what you could do is just the same way that media queries work from the server, you could just use a media query hook. If I could use media query, find out the width of the screen, and then set the initial default state of React to that, that's pretty nice because then it just works. So this is actually what people do a lot of the time. And then you realize there's a problem here. So let's say you use a media query, you get that it's mobile, and so your default is false. What happens when this component runs in the server? So that's the problem. What happens when the component runs in the server? And this is where it gets really confusing. These hooks, like use media query or different versions of it that come from libraries, also have very different kind of ad hoc behavior for how to handle the server case, because you can't measure what obviously the device is on the server. It's the same piece of HTML being sent to everybody. And so sometimes they will make the width and the height undefined or null, or sometimes they'll make it 0. And then also on the client, they run differently as well. So once we're in a context where we have access to window and we can start measuring it, some of them do what you said, which is use a layout effect so that we prevent rendering. We are basically blocking painting on a render so that we can measure things. Sometimes that's acceptable, sometimes it's not. And then sometimes we do the thing where we use an effect. And so the first time through, the width and the height are undefined. And so you can't use that information for your initial render. And then they trigger a re-render by setting the state with the width. Now, if you think about that implementation, it's actually pretty perfect because you are not able to use that information on the initial render on the client, which is also true for the browser. So that's the version of the hook that I prefer.
You're not able to use it
on the server. That's the version of the hook I prefer because it forces this mental model, it locks it in. You are forced to not access anything on the initial render, which it needs to match from the server for the hydration to avoid the hydration mismatch error. Basically, your first render from the server needs to match the first render from the client.
Yeah, yes. I like what you said, but I mean, imagine I'm writing an app that's just an SPA and I don't have SSR. Now you're telling me
it's amazing.
But now you're telling me I have to. Yeah, it's amazing. You're saying you're jealous of me because I'm writing.
I'm jealous of us building Ember map. Honestly, a lot of times I am, man. Ember full SPA mode is great. There's so much you don't think about, but there's also a stuff you don't get from not having a server.
But put yourself in that developer's shoes. Like, I don't care that your server doesn't have access to the screen width. I don't want a null value of the screen width on my first render. Right. Like, I have it available. Right. It's right there. Right. I can reach out and touch it. Like, don't tell me it's null.
Right. So this is the same as
you have
it's the same as when you're Next.js and you're like you use router and you can't get the query and you're like, I'm writing a code in JavaScript that's running in my browser and I'm looking at the query params in my URL string. Why can't I access that?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's we use Next and we do a lot of SSR apps. So we like the version that's null on the first render of the server because it has to be, and then null on the first render of the client so that it matches the server and we don't get hydration mismatch errors. But I think it really comes down to what kind of app you're building before you pick those hooks. And it's kind of a bummer if you're just you pull up a hook that was made for one of those contexts, but not the other. And you have to be aware of that.
Dude, there is a lot of cost to the SSR stuff. I mean, for a site like Build UI, it's literally perfect. Also, when we first started thinking more about this problem, spending more time thinking about it, we thought it was a problem that had to do with SSG and static sites, but it doesn't matter if you're using Remix or even Rails or whatever. It's the hydration and the match between the first server render and the first client render and making sure you're not using things that are in both.
The thing that kind of solves all this is CSS, because the browser is really good at taking CSS and HTML and then rendering the right thing. And you can generate the same CSS and same HTML for mobile users as well as desktop users. And
exactly.
So that's whenever I hit this problem, and man, I hit this like every 2 weeks.
I know. It's hard. It's sometimes hard to remember that that's the answer.
Yeah. I always take a step back and just think, okay, how would you do this without React state, without effects? And that usually kind of gets me like closer to the right path or on the right path.
Exactly. So, right. So basically coming back, we actually didn't talk about the final solution. So what is the final solution? You have the version where you're using hidden and medium : block so that you are using CSS media queries to hide it on mobile. Now you hydrate React. You want to add interactivity. So you want to add something where when you click on it, you toggle it. This is where like jQuery would be super easy actually, because jQuery uses the DOM as a source of truth. And that's kind of actually the key insight here is that in this case, the DOM is the source of truth. It has to be because it's the only place to put that information in a way that is robust to the initial render from both the server and the client. So what do? You render it with CSS, hide it in small devices. You run an effect and you check the property there. Is the display is it being shown or not? Because the source of truth is in the DOM. It's kind of like D3 too. D3 does the same thing. And once you find that out, you can set state. Actually, you don't even have to use an effect to do this, do you? I think we didn't even use an effect for this.
I think you did. I think your code used an effect because you need the component to run once, get that initial render that matches the server render, and then basically the effect can say, okay, I'm mounted, I'm in a browser, I can start measuring. Your code that you used to solve this, I thought was really like it was super straightforward. It was elegant. It was easy to understand. Yeah. It was just getting to that point.
Yes, it ended up pretty elegant. I agree, and like smaller than I thought. So yeah, you basically. I don't know if I use an effect, dude. I think I might not even.
You did. I remember.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if you need to though.
You do.
Why?
Because you have to measure. You have to measure the screen.
You have to, but you only use window. You don't have to measure. You can.
No, you have to measure the screen width.
The screen width. But you can do it during the first paint, but the static paint from the server is still going to be correct. So if open is undefined and I have access to window, set is open to window.innerWidth is greater than 768. You don't need to paint anything to do that.
I know, but I think because you're reading from window, it has to be an effect.
It's a good question.
I know it's like guarded in if, and it's like
it wouldn't
make
a difference in this case.
And everything.
Anyway, so for now, let's just say put in an effect. Probably belongs in an effect. So, anyways, just to come back, you render the thing, and the source of truth is in the DOM, and we want to be good React programmers and have is open be the source of truth, because then we can do all sorts of things using crazy hooks like use media query, which like looks for resize events if we want to like auto collapse the sidebar when you turn your phone or something. We can do all that sorts of stuff if we have the state in React as a source of truth outside of the DOM. So that's what you do. You run an effect, you read the DOM, you say, hey, is the display property hidden? Or is it display none or not? If it's display none, I know it's open false. And then in your render, it's really cool snippet, really. In your render, you say if is open is undefined, then I'm using my CSS hidden, hidden medium colon block. But if I have is open, then I just use is open and I remove the CSS meter. So the CSS meter is literally just for the initial state, and so that the visual output is correct. And then once I know that state from, look, I've had a chance to render, I read it. Now I can switch over to open and use that instead. And then it's as if you're writing an SPA, which is cool. I think there's this cool idea of like you add SSR to like an SPA page and you want to draw a boundary around it. You want a box around the stuff that makes it hard and makes you feel like you're not writing an SPA. You don't want to be guarding against window and stuff when you're building features. Like when you're building features, I want you to feel like you're just writing React in an SPA world, because it's like, honestly, it's like the easiest way to do anything, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's just times where the SSR piece makes it harder. So you want to draw a box around it and then get back into React world with all of your state hydrated and correct and a single source of truth kind of as fast as possible. That's kind of how I think about it. So it was a fun question. It motivated a lot of good kind of thoughtful experimentation.
Yeah. I really liked it. And my main takeaway is I should just be writing SPAs without SSR.
I mean, listen, it's a fun way to build apps, in my opinion. I was thinking about, we don't have to get into this, but we should start podcasting more regular because it's a fun way to talk about all this stuff. As cool as server components, Build UI has been fun to work on, man. It's a fast site, and there's some issues, but overall, it's nice having a static site for content. We're going to get the CMS in there. I think that's going to be extremely nice. I use my side projects, some of my fitness side projects. And we're talking about React server components, how it might be even cooler. And the stale but while revalidate stuff, man, is just really so cool. So I wonder if we lose that when we go to server components. There's something nice about
server components are great, man. They're great. Like,
I focus the browser, and like everything just updates. It's awesome.
I would like more control over like caching. let me prefetch this page, let me invalidate this other page so that when I navigate to it, I get a completely.
When you watch a video, you invalidate the cache and you get a video view.
Yeah, like I would like more control over that, but server components they're awesome. You realize how many hoops we were jumping through before we had them.
Yeah.
I just want to pull data out of a database. Just let me pull data out of a database in my component. Stop. I have to set up an API route. I have to set up.
I know.
It's just
but we're going to go back
ceremony
through this entire thing. Everyone's so excited about kind of building websites like in this way. The whole reason we started building SPAs, like there was one, I think it was like maybe Yehuda and Tom back in the Ember days talking about this, the way they were like, you shouldn't have to refresh. You never press refresh on a browser. And it's like, that's an interesting way to think about it. And it's an interesting kind of way to think about like, that's something you can achieve with an SPA very well. And when you're, looking at Twitter, you refresh your feed if you want new tweets, but as you're, or typing in WhatsApp or, you don't refresh the page to get new data a lot of times when you're using applications, right?
Yep.
And so that's kind of how they were thinking about it. Whereas now, if we're like, let's go all in on server components URL, it's almost like the user should be more aware of the browser as part of the UI because, again, as the Remix folks talk about, a form submission is a navigation, right? And all of these things. So it's almost like it becomes part of the user's interface to the actual application. Whereas when we started moving away from multi-page apps and building SPAs, it was very cool that I could see other people checking off their goals in the app and I didn't have to like navigate somewhere or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. And I think that
there's use cases for it. It would be cool to see like an auto refreshing server component or something like that.
Yeah, you can do it, but you want more control over the cache like you have with a tool like
with SWR.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm about to navigate to user 123, but before I navigate, like right when I mouse over that link, let me fetch all their data so that navigation is instant. And we do not have that today with server components. And
that's an awesome feature of SWR.
Yeah. Yep.
And you refocus the browser and it's like it removes a lot of things to think about, honestly.
I don't see that as a thing that server components take away.
Right.
I just think that
the ergonomics aren't there yet, maybe.
Correct. And it might take a few years, and so it's perfectly fine to want to use SWR while that stuff is getting figured out.
Right. Cool, man. Fun stuff.
Yeah.
You think it's a good place to wrap it for the episode?
Yeah, I got one more thing. This will be quick, but
cool.
So I have
Did you listen to the poker podcast yet?
No, I haven't. I have like a lot of bad podcasts queued up. I need to just do a podcast.
Do you save in the podcast app?
No, I subscribe to them, and then I just get all this junk in my library. So I have to just do an audit.
You got to use save in the podcast app. And then, so if I send you something, you save it. And
I can save that.
When you want to listen to something specific, you go to the saved, and then you can listen to that. And then if you just want to listen to whatever, you use the main library and feed. That's kind of how I've been doing it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I should do that for sure. Okay.
Anyways, what do you got to talk about?
So I have this library, Next S3 Upload, just this library that makes it easy to upload things to S3. And over the years, like S3's API it's an API designed by AWS, but a lot of different hosting providers have been S3 compatible to make it easy for developers to use their platform or move over to their platform. So in a way, like the S3 API has turned in from like an API to like a protocol because you have all these different hosting providers support. It's actually pretty amazing. Like I can't think of anything that I've ever seen do that. Yeah. So anyway, Next S3 Upload supports this now. It uses the S3 API, and I have like configuration where you can point it at any host. So you can use DigitalOcean's storage system. You can use Cloudflare R2. It was, took
so this is if I'm already a DigitalOcean customer and I want my images to go to my DigitalOcean.
Yep.
Through Yeah, then you don't put in like AWS keys anymore. You're putting in DigitalOcean environment variables.
Yeah, DigitalOcean basically has like a backwards compatible
Wow,
S3 API storage platform. It's amazing.
that's crazy.
It is.
It's almost like
amazing.
it passes through because of the protocol.
Yeah, it doesn't even touch AWS. It just goes to DigitalOcean servers. But like the API has turned into a protocol. It's like
that is crazy.
It's like, imagine if React was so good at building like UIs that every UI framework just had useState and useEffect and component. You know what I mean? And that's sort of what's happened with storage. That everything is just the S3 API. So it's a protocol now. It's just amazing.
Crazy, right? And then anything that works with useState and React, if everyone else is using it in the same way and the API is the same, that thing would work with them too. So that's kind of like it's like L2 or whatever.
Now, the funny thing here is all these S3 compatible hosts all end up supporting like 35% of the S3 API. And it's like a different 35% for every single one. So like, there's tons of just bugs and stuff. But it's super interesting. Okay, so anyway, I'm just setting the stage. So because I support this, I get issues from people all the time about, hey, it doesn't work with XYZ hosts that I've just never heard of. And like I have to figure out like what's going on here and so on. So someone opened an issue that's like, it doesn't work with, it's like the serverless frameworks S3 offline storage something.
Oh my goodness.
And they posted this giant YAML file. And I was just like, yeah, there's like no chance I'm going to deal with this. Like that, just like, I don't have time to read through your YAML file. So what I do here is I do the nice open source thing where I say, hey, like, bummer, it's not working. Can you set up a demo app or an example that I can take a look at? And then I can actually see like an error message and go through it. So I sent that, and dude, within like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, this guy had gotten back to me with a StackBlitz link. And I clicked the StackBlitz link. Yeah. And it's running the serverless framework, serverless's S3 adapter, the Next.js app, and he built a page that's like an upload page using my library.
Wow.
And so I was this was all just running in a web browser.
Docker?
All this software. It's web containers. So it's it's like a browser API. I'm not sure what StackBlitz controls and what the browser controls. I'm not sure where the boundary is there. But the fact
it was effectively like running like Firebase right there in the thing.
Dude, it was a type of thing like where I would say like, hey, can you put together a demo? No one does it because they don't want to take the time to set everything up. And he did it so quickly. And then also too, like,
that's crazy.
Dude, I was able to use it all in my browser, see the error, and then it took me like 30 minutes to get a fix out. What? And then run it again and see that it all worked. And it was just, there was no like, oh, set up these ENVs on your computer, download this, run that. It was just all in the browser. It was amazing. Like,
that's crazy.
It was I had like a moment where like I just kind of felt like a dinosaur developer because like I'm just so used to running things on my computer. And when I saw this like just everything running in StackBlitz, I was blown away. Wow. And it actually like, it wasn't just like, oh, here's a demo where we can run like, not picking on anyone here, but where we can run like Postgres or FFmpeg in the browser. It's like, okay, that's cool, but I'm always going to run those locally. But this was actually like, it let him get the exact environment to me. I didn't have to do any setup on my computer, and I was able to play with the environment. And again, all in the browser. I could open up the console, see all the console logs. It was unbelievable.
That's really cool. I mean, I love the idea of it. I've never seen it work. So I'd like to check it out because I feel like, every time we try to do that stuff, I'm very impatient until a point where I go back to my computer. Something I have to reset, is restarting. I had no idea what's going on. I just want it to run locally. But that sounds really cool.
It reminded me of
I would love never have to run Postgres again locally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It reminded me of a thing like that I've heard like Paul Graham say where he's like, really good ideas start off as just toys. And that's what I see when I see like FFmpeg in the browser or someone running Postgres in the browser. I'm like, oh, that's cool, but it's not something I can ever use.
Right.
So it's a toy. But then like,
right.
you know, a year later, someone is opening reproductions that use like a whole serverless stack.
And it's because of web containers.
Yeah. So it's pretty, it's probably has to do with, again, I don't know where the boundaries are, but
you're saying it's becoming more useful, like there's more use cases.
It was really cool. I was really impressed. And the fact that I was able
awesome.
to fix this, because usually people just say, oh, run it on your computer. And like, I can't take 2 days to learn how to set this thing up. So
yeah, exactly. That's awesome. I'd like to check it out. Speaking of FFmpeg in the browser, I listened to this podcast from the changelog with the creator of Node.
Ryan
what's
Dahl.
his name? Ryan?
Yeah,
Ryan Dahl. Yep. And he's talking about Deno, and he was talking about their serverless infrastructure. Also, like serverless feels like such like a. Is there anything? Is it actually? Does anyone care about it, or is it just like a marketing thing that people like to say? I'm being very like whatever. Anyway, it's nice to hear Ryan Dahl talk about it instead of just big companies with big like silly, it's like that are vague, and it's like you don't understand what they're saying, or they're sweeping problems under the rug, right? This guy really believes in it so much that the serverless infrastructure they're building it's basically them and Cloudflare. He said everyone else is wrapping one of them too. So they're talking with each other about making a protocol. To kind of to your earlier point about like here's how like they have basically a working group which is it's not an official standards body, but they're like, we should decide a protocol and come up with a protocol that works for both of us for like invoking a serverless function with like a payload or something, or how you would do that, right? And the kinds of things you would need to send to it in terms of like, and how does it get distributed and balanced and all this stuff, pooled and all this stuff. So it was pretty interesting.
Cool.
But it sounded, he was making this argument about stuff they're adding to their platform, which might eventually include data, like stateful data, like databases, which was super exciting. But the other one was like, instead of having like Linux running, like he's like, serverless started out as these little functions that you just hit, and then you like, okay, but the function queued up a job that like a big monolithic Rails app is going to pull off and run with Sidekick. But then he's like, Deno is like made for it's the edge first. It's like a lot of these new platforms are made for like the edge, and they don't need to boot up a whole Linux server and a node, a container node and all this stuff. And you're starting to see them do more work with like lightweight code and lightweight functions. He's like, my dream is you like open and write a 50-line JavaScript file that can like render a web page, send an email, and then like whatever. And it does it all there. And it can just spin up and spin down. And it's not reliant on any long-running monolithic server. And so he's talking about like the startup time of these things. And it was pretty interesting. That's kind of the vision there. Like just the ability to start. It's like 200 milliseconds with network latency for everything. Like, again, to run like a 50-line function that would like, have everything you need to run FFmpeg on an image. So that's the point he was saying. He's like, we're actually moving away from having like Linux and stuff. And so if you think about it, there's actually an analogy here where you're a JavaScript web developer, you pop up in Chrome DevTools and you start typing things. And like now you can even import things in the browser. It's almost like a terminal.
Yeah.
It's almost like a terminal, like a shell. And he's like, again, people usually are like, all right, well, I need to like SSH in my terminal to do anything. But like, if you can import FFmpeg in your console and run it on an image, like that is awesome. And he's like, that's actually what we're building. And like, we want to give you like a browser. And also you think about a browser as like starting a new tab. How easy is it to start a new tab? It's built for it. It's unbelievably fast and low memory, and the sandbox environment of the internet, right? Of the web. You have your bank tab open here. You've got your Slack here, and you've got like a malicious website right here, and it's fine, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, this is actually the platform that we want to build, where you need a new connection, you need a new request comes in or whatever, something happens, you're just running new tabs. It's like a new tab for your serverless functions and all the work that you need to do. And it's lightweight, and you can like terminal in just with like dev tools and JavaScript packages or Deno packages or whatever, with TypeScript and Java. It was pretty interesting, man.
It's awesome. I mean, dude, the apps we write, we don't need OS level APIs.
Yep.
So
exactly,
I'm all for it.
Exactly. It's pretty neat. I love the idea of like the dev tools as like the modern term, because I hate the terminal. I hate typing awk and grep. I hate that. It's like, you know what I mean? And he's like, JavaScript is the default language, period. I mean, he's like, you know, he was making some strong statements, but it's pretty compelling. And he was like, it is the default programming language, period. And the dev tools are like your kind of Swiss Army knife as a JavaScript developer.
For sure.
So what if that's the only interface you need to like the platform that runs your software? It's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. I'm all for it.
Yeah, cool. I'll link to that episode because there's a fun one in case people want to check it out. Otherwise, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody. We're gonna see you in a week or 2 or 3. We got a lot of stuff planned for the new year. I'm excited to get into a new course on Build UI. We're going to be building like a back office SPA like application. There's going to be like, you know, admin, registration, tables with filtering and sorting, permissions, all that kind of good stuff. We're going to build in Remix. It's going to be a good time. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that. But for now, that's it from us. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.